liked it, the
I
abbreviated?
did. That was awesome.
I thought they'd done a nice job of doing the ellipses. I think they may have been kind. She always writes it. She always uses it folded rather than
Good morning. Okay. Not good morning yet. Okay, now it's really good morning. I meant it before, too, just so you know. Today is Tuesday, April 23rd at 9:01 or 9:02 a.m., depending on which clock you look at, and I'll now call this meeting to order. I'd like to introduce board members and staff. With me today are my fellow colleagues. To my left is board member Dee Diadamo, and to my right is board member Tam Dodak. Mr. Howard, could you please introduce the staff?
Yes, assisting the board today are Janine Townsend and Courtney Davis. To my left, Michael Lawford, Chief Counsel. To my right, Karen Turgovich and John Bishop, Chief Deputies.
Thank you. All of you are probably familiar with our emergency evacuation procedure, but I'll just remind you to take a moment to look at your nearest exits in the case you hear a fire alarm or other alarm. We'll gather our stuff and evacuate the room immediately. It's suggested that we go to J. Neely Johnson Park and Community Garden, which is 11th Street between E and F Streets. If you'd like to stay in the group, you'll be more likely to know when we're called back. And when we'll resume after such an event. Obey all traffic signals and be careful when crossing the street. The meeting is being webcast and recorded, so please speak into the microphone when you come up. It's not that easy. You have to be quite close to it for it to work. And also, we'd appreciate it if you turn off or set on stun your beepers and cell phones. With that done, we're going to move into the public forum section of the meeting, and the board will hear from any person wishing to speak about any matter that's not pending before the board. Anyone? Okay. Now we'll move on to board business. Next, we'll consider the minutes from the April 9th, 2013 board meeting. I'll entertain a motion.
Move for adoption.
Second.
Right. Any vote? Let's vote on the minutes.
Aye.
Okay, they're adopted. Mr. Howard, item 3.
I'm sorry, do I get to provide a board member report?
Oh yeah, I missed that. That's number 2. Would you like to make a report?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, I would. Just a quick update from the Central Valley Regional Water Board meeting I attended 2 weeks ago. The one item that I was able to stay for, which I thought was very interesting, was a staff update. Actually, not just a staff update, but an update from the stakeholder group on the development of their proposed drinking water policy. This was something that was initiated by CalFed a while back, and a stakeholder group was formed to look at developing a this is not it, look at a proposed drinking water policy. At first, it started out to include things such as salt and nitrate and other things, but slowly they narrow it down to just looking at cryptosporidium and giardia. And they are working toward developing some proposed water quality objectives for the Regional Water Board to consider in July. The reason I thought that it was significant to report back to you, was just the stakeholder process that they utilized, which included ag, which included the wastewater community, which included, I don't know to what extent the environmental community participated, but the fact that there was no opposition voice at the meeting, it seemed to be a very collaborative effort, I think bodes well and sets a really good model for going forward as we address other drinking water issues in the Central Valley. And then the second thing I wanted to report from that meeting, and now Janine, please put it up. Janine. This is an excerpt from the Executive Officer report that Executive Officer Pamela Creedon provided to her board meeting. And I was extremely pleased and impressed that for the first time in a regional board executive officer report, there is a report on the region's performance measures and performance targets that were established. And I expect, or I believe, that it's the executive officer's intention to maintain this and update the accomplishment, ongoing accomplishment in terms of achieving those targets, and then making revisions as necessary along the way. I don't know, Karen, to what extent, or Ms. Turgovich, to what extent other regional boards are doing similar things, but I found this to be, first of all, very enheartening in terms of seeing that this integration of performance measures and targets are getting, into the regional board thinking. And then secondly, how do we encourage further tracking and integration like this?
Thank you, Member Dodek. To our knowledge, Region 5 is one of the first regions to present in this fashion in their board meetings the status of their progress towards achieving targets for the fiscal year. So this is a tremendous effort, and we really appreciate Region 5 leading the way. In the past, other regions have sporadically taken the status of their achievement towards their targets to their board in a public session, but not as a routine matter. Roger Briggs at one point and Michael Thomas did have a discussion with their board. I believe other regions around the state have sporadically had the conversation. But we could entertain a discussion with the EOs from all of the regions about how to institutionalize this kind of report, perhaps on even a quarterly basis or semi-annual basis. They may wish to include as a standard part of their executive directors, their executive officers report, so that it's posted on the internet as well. As you know, our progress towards targets for the fiscal year in which we currently reside are not posted publicly. They're available internally because our databases are not necessarily current at the point in time during mid-year points. But if the executive officers are making this information available publicly and through their reports, then we could have it all posted in a single place.
And to follow a regional board example, how are the state boards' programs and performance measures being tracked, and are we reporting and updating like Region 5 is starting to do?
Well, the answer to the latter question is no. But it's certainly—
That was the hint, Ms. Turgovich.
It's certainly a very simple matter for us, and we can do that readily. Our performance for the prior year, like all the regions, is available on our performance report on our homepage. The targets that we have established for ourselves for the current fiscal year, like all the regions, is available publicly on our homepage. It's the progress during the course of the year that is not, and we can certainly make that available.
Right, thank you.
That's great, thank you. All right, I just have one brief one, not in great detail, but Board Member Moore and I spent 4 days last week visiting with the 5 tribes on the Klamath River in response, in part in response to Board Member Dodek's promise that we would go out there. We're doing it in a variety of trips to go visit the different parties to the Klamath River issue, and it was just terrific to be able to spend that much time with tribes. I mention it only because Cali, PA will be hosting, I think it's Cali, PA that hosts the annual Tribal Water Summer, is joint with Resources. Mr. Howard and I will be there for both days, and I've been given the honor of speaking at a plenary the second morning. So we'll be able to come back and report to you both on the development of a tribal policy for Cal EPA. Resource already has one, and Mr. Laufer's been working very closely on that, as has Gita Kapahi. So we'll give you an update on that. But the relationship with the tribe is clearly important. It's different than the work I did at the federal level, where we had a full-on trust responsibility and consultative responsibility. But I'm pleased to see the state deciding under an executive order by this governor to try and figure out how to have our relationships with the tribes be as meaningful and as respectful as possible. So we'll fill you when we get back. Big Tribal Week. All right, now, Mr. Howard, would you please introduce item 3? Sorry, I'm so eager, I keep skipping items.
The Delta Water Master occasionally provides reports about issues relevant to the Delta, and he's prepared a report on gate operations in the Delta. Craig Wilson is, of course, the Delta Water Master.
Good morning, board members. Craig Wilson, State Board, Delta Water Master. Before I begin my formal remarks, I think congratulations are in order. Chair Marcus, I'd like to congratulate you on being named chair. Board Member Dodek, I'd like to congratulate you on being reappointed. And Board Member Diadama, I'd like to congratulate you on being appointed. I was going to tease and congratulate Board Member Stephen Moore about being the last man standing, but he's not here today.
And he got confirmed last week, so.
That's right.
Great.
He did get confirmed. Anyway, this report, this is actually the 7th in a series of reports that I've presented to the board since being appointed as Delta Water Master, and it's on the subject of gates and barriers in the Delta. This next slide basically shows the authority upon which these reports are being submitted to the board. This one's a little bit different. Most of the reports that were previously presented dealt with water right issues. This one's a little bit more technical in nature and is more relevant to the water quality issues and conveyance operations. It's a little bit out of my comfort zone because most of the reports I've prepared previously kind of are more legal issues. As my training as an attorney, this is more technical. So but it's been very interesting and researching it. Kind of as a prelude to talking about gates and barriers specific is to talk a little bit about the hydrodynamics of the Delta, because gates and barriers are in essence seeking to modify the hydraulics in the Delta in a beneficial way. And so the 3 major influences on hydrodynamics are obviously the tides, which is by far the most dominant. People tend to forget that. You have this big surge twice a day in and out of this tidal surge, which is an orders of magnitude higher than the actual flows into the Delta and exports from the Delta. But the latter 2 are obviously impacting issues in the Delta dealing with hydrodynamics. And in fact, these operations through conveyance and export and bringing water into the Delta do raise issues dealing with water quality and fish issues because of fish getting into some of the water supply corridors. And basically some of the operations and conveyance have altered the normal east-west tidal flow to have some more north-south flows that has created both salinity and fish and supply corridor issues. And that gets us into the whole purpose of why gates and barriers have been used in the Delta to try to address both of these issues, both improving water quality and keeping fish out of some of the water supply corridors. Most of the projects are kind of nibbling around the edges because the hydrodynamics, it's kind of hard to greatly influence what Mother Nature is doing, but some of these gates and barriers have proved to be of benefit in tweaking some of the water quality and fishery issues, and that's what I'm going to be addressing. So the bulk of the presentation will talk about some of the present gate and barrier structures in the Delta, the potential reoperation and improvements that could be made to these existing structures, and also talk a little bit about future and potential barrier and gate projects. So when you talk about existing and current structures kind of coming from the north to the south, you've got 3 basic features that I'm going to talk about. In the North Delta, the Suisun Marsh salinity control gates, the Central Delta, the Delta Cross Channel gates, and in the South Delta, the Temporary Barriers Project. So taking them in order, This is a photo of the Sassoon Marsh barrier gates. It's one of the earliest gate and barrier projects in the Delta, and actually one of the more successful projects. And it's useful to see it because it actually is quite impressive. The reason that the gate structure was proposed and constructed is because you had some water quality issues in Sassoon Marsh that were brought to light as the area was attempted to be improved as a wetland habitat. And because of the geography and configuration of the channels in Sassoon Marsh, you actually had a net movement of water during the tidal cycle from the west to the east, and that drew salt water toward the east. And the gates actually, by operation in connection with the tides can reverse that somewhat and actually have a net movement from the from the east to the west, thereby bringing more fresh water into the Sassoon Marsh area and improving water quality. Basically, when flows are high, the gates can be closed on the flood tide to keep the salt water from intruding, and then opened on the ebb tide to let more fresh water in. There were some navigation issues because this structure was located on Montezuma Slough, which is a fairly large water course, so there are actually locks that were constructed in connection with the facility to help boat navigation. Moving on to the main structure in the central delta, as most of you know, the Delta Cross Channel was constructed many years ago to try to improve the operation of the export projects by allowing water to get more directly to the export pumps, also improve some of the water quality in the South Delta. It was a gated facility, and what happened, even though the main purpose of the Delta Cross Channel was to provide this corridor to the export projects, there were some unintended consequences of the fish being drawn out of the Sacramento River corridor for migratory purposes and into the channel and toward the pumps. And so the board many years ago, in one of its water right decisions, required the project operators to close the gates at certain times to keep the fish out of the supply corridors, and it's worked pretty well for that project. And then the last major barrier projects in the Delta are more in the South Delta. They're barrier projects, and there's actually three projects whose main purpose really is to increase water levels in the Southern Delta. These are more primitive projects, and that basically every year rocks are thrown across these water courses and creating a barrier. One of the barriers is to keep fish out of the Southern Delta so they won't be drawn toward the pumps. The other three, their main purpose is for increasing water levels in the South Delta, but at times they can be used and operated to better the circulation by tying open some of the culverts and allowing more circulation. And also they vary the height of some of these barriers, and it makes more of a circulation. So they can be used again to kind of tweak kind of a vexing issue of salinity issues in the Southern Delta, which has a lot more stagnant kind of backwater areas. Now, regarding possible improvements to the existing facilities, there's been some proposals to improve the Delta Cross Channel gates by making them a little bit larger and also operable. They can only be closed and opened manually now, and it's sort of a long process. And if you made them more operable, you could possibly operate them in connection with tidal cycles and have more flexibility. Same thing with the South Delta temporary barriers. As I said before, they're just basically rock, a bunch of rocks that are thrown across some of these water courses in the South Delta. If you built permanent operable gates, you could have a situation where you could actually operate them in connection with tidal cycles and perhaps make them run more efficiently. And some of the also improvements that have been proposed are dealing with predator concerns. There's been a lot of issues with the gates and barriers because they kind of are a stopping point. Fish tend to congregate there, and there's been a lot of predation issues. So there's been studies of what can be done to possibly improve the predator concerns. And one of the issues that it actually has been used to try to address the predator concern is the use of the non-physical barriers, basically a combination of light, sound, bubbles. I heard the rumor that the best sound to deter fish was bagpipe music. I kind of take offense to that because I'm of Scottish background, but I think they are actually studying different types of music, different types of strobe lights, and sounds like kind of an interesting project. You know, they proved to be pretty effective. There have been some pilot studies. They've thrown one up on the head of the old river, and they had one at Georgiana Slough just downstream of the Delta Cross Channel. And you know, they may have a future, although they still also have some predator concerns, because anywhere where you have the fish kind of lingering in an area, it's an issue. But I think they have I think they'll continue to study these and perhaps make wider use of them in the future, because they have the obvious benefit of not affecting you know, boating traffic, navigation, you know, if they're effective in actually you know, serving their main purpose of either keeping fish out of the water supply corridors or improving water quality. Possible future projects, I've listed a few of them there. I think I'll talk only about two of them. The first one being Frank's Tract, which is a submerged, you know, it used to be an island in the delta that there was a levee breach many years ago, and it was not reclaimed. It's in a situation somewhat similar to Suisun Marsh in that there's a net flow from the you know, west to the east, bringing higher salty water into the interior of the delta, also as a more direct route for the fish to get toward the export pumps. So there's been some studies of possible gates and barriers that would serve two purposes, stopping the area from becoming as salty as it is now, and also keeping the fish away from the pumps. So that's just one example of a potential future project. This next slide is probably the most provocative of the slides that I'm going to present, because it talks about something that really doesn't nibble around the edges. The photo on the left is an existing project, one of the largest you know, engineering feats, I think, in the history of mankind. It's a tidal surge barrier that was built on the Rhine River corridor heading toward Rotterdam in the Netherlands. They had some horrible situations with tidal surges causing literally billions of dollars in damage, thousands of people being killed back in the 50s and 60s in a couple of events. And this project basically is open almost all of the time. It operates kind of like the flappers in an old pinball machine, and it can be closed within an hour if a tidal surge is coming in. But in most cases, it stays open. It doesn't affect, you know, like fish issues, navigation. It's only been closed once for real-life purposes, other than just operational maintenance in its history. It was constructed in the 90s, but they theorized that even though the project cost upwards of $1 billion, it probably saved many times that amount of money in damage, and obviously saved lives. So it's basically an insurance policy. The slide on your right is an idea of whether a similar type project could conceivably be constructed below the confluence of the Sacramento-San Joaquin rivers near Chips Island, where the river is fairly narrow. In fact, this is you know, in the Chips Island area, it actually is narrower than this project in the Netherlands. So obviously, it could be constructed. When I've talked to people about, you know, a Western tidal barrier, they usually kind of laugh at me or say this has been studied and it's been rejected. But the more I looked at it, the project that was studied and rejected many years ago was basically just throwing a permanent rock structure across the Sacramento River, you know, south of downstream of the confluence of the rivers, which obviously would have totally impeded the fish, would have totally impeded navigation. It would have turned the delta into a freshwater lake. There were, you know, multiple problems with it, and it was, you know, soundly rejected. This idea is totally different than that. These operable gates would remain open almost all the time. They would be an insurance policy basically against a catastrophic event, such as a major levee failure where the you know, the interior of the delta would become very salty, and it would be an insurance policy not only against you know, to protect the water supply projects, but also protect the delta itself. So it's You know, there's been a little bit of study on it, but I haven't heard a lot of information about it. I haven't seen anything in the BDCP about it, but I thought it was just an interesting idea to bring up about a barrier or gate project in the Delta that's more than just these kind of nibbling at the edges projects that we've talked about in the past. So just to kind of close up, in far as recommendations, I think, you know, the existing gates and barriers have served a useful purpose. They have been shown to improve water quality, protect fisheries, and that they can keep fish out of the water supply corridors. And I think they can help regardless of which of the different types of conveyance operations are implemented through BDCP. And additional projects I think can be helped. There's some on the drawing board, such as Frank's Tract and the expansion of some of the non-physical barrier projects. And obviously the predation issue needs to be dealt with. Navigation concerns have to be addressed. And I think, you know, what we need to look for is projects that have kind of, you know, get you, you know, two for the price of one. A lot of these projects can not only address water quality issues, but also fish protection by keeping them away from some of the export operations. So with that, I will close unless you have any questions.
Question?
Thank you. This was very useful. Just wondering if you could walk through some of the projects in terms of their relationship to BDCP for any of these that are either included in BDCP's current draft or for whatever reasons, like one that sort of jumps out as I think a history of having problems is 2 gates. So
Sure.
Any that have either seemed to advance through BDCP or fallen off.
Yeah, the 2 gates project, which you mentioned, which I had in the slide but didn't discuss, was an idea of throwing some kind of temporary. It was almost like a pilot study of some gate structures in the Delta that could be put in and out rather quickly. I think one of the main issues that caused that project to be kind of put on the back burner was the navigation concern. The locations that were proposed, there was a lot of public outcry about the potential impact on people's ability to navigate and fish in the Delta. So I think that's something, like I said, that has to really be considered in determining where these projects are constructed. As you know, the Delta is a maze of these different waterways, and a lot of times the location can matter. As far as the documents in the BDCP itself, there is some brief discussion of gates and barriers, and a lot of it's couched in the concept of adaptive management. You know, stating that these projects have proved to be of some value. We're going to continue to study them, perhaps put some in as needed in various places. The Frank's Tract project, I haven't seen a lot of opposition to that by anyone, so that one that could possibly go forward for further study, and it's actually been studied to the extent that there's it's pretty much a shelf-ready item if people were willing to put it in. These are not cheap; they cost money to do, and so it's just sort of a question of whether it's an appropriate mitigation and which location is it appropriate. And again, I think the 3 major things you're looking for is, one, can it help water quality? Can it help protect fish and keep them away from some of the adverse impacts of project operations? And can you locate them in places where navigation is not a concern?
And then do we have permitting authority?
I mean, obviously, these projects would have to go through, permitting. That the board would not be constructing them.
Right.
I don't know that we would have too much of a permitting authority over them. But obviously, they would have to go through a CEQA type of analysis and probably get, maybe Corps of Engineers dredge and fill permits. There definitely would be permits, involved in constructing and implementing these projects.
Like even on the temporary rock barrier that goes up every year?
Yeah, there's usually a process every year. I mean, it's kind of, since it's an ongoing project put in every year, the analysis has been done, but there always is a permit, I believe it's through either the Corps of Engineers or through someone where there is some scrutiny each time when it's put in, and the fish agencies, can weigh in, and there's been some issues like the head of the old river barrier, one of the barriers that's put in to keep fish away from the southern pumps. There's been an issue of whether or not not that project, really fully serves its intended purpose, because when you close that area of the water off, the fish can't get more, they don't have a direct avenue toward the pumps, but they have to go this kind of long way around the San Joaquin River, to get out to sea, and there's a lot of predation along there, and that coupled with the fact that there's a better salvage operations going on with the fish that are going down into the southern interior, there's a question of whether that project, is really that beneficial to saving fish. So that's the kind of analysis that goes on every year through the environmental review process.
Thanks, Craig. That's a good, actually, it's a good overview of these. It's interesting to me, having been involved in this in the 90s and then coming back just a few years ago, how much controversy there is about all of these that continues to this day. And at the Delta Stewardship Council, a lot of this was proposed as an early action, and then when the committee looking at it looked at it, they found just the complexity that you were talking about. So hopefully we'll all muddle along and make progress in this work. So thanks. Intuitively, they totally make sense, but then when you look into it, there are very strong feelings on
the devil's
more
in the
than both
details.
sides on almost each of them. It's kind of a epochal kind of a struggle between people who have very strongly held views. So thank you very much for that update. Going on to the next update, I'm looking forward to both of these updates. Mr. Howard, will you introduce the next item?
Yes, we have a number of Mercury projects going on at the San Francisco Regional Board and the Central Valley Board, and also on statewide level. And so we thought it would be important to get an update on all these activities. And we have a number of staff people who are going to run through these various projects and their relationship to each other.
Morning, Chair Marcus and members of the board. I'm Janice Cook, environmental scientist with the Central Valley Water Board. Is your microphone on? Is your microphone? Yes, there. That's better. Sorry. Good morning, Chair Marcus and members of the board. I'm Janice Cook, an environmental scientist with the Central Valley Water Board. Joining me in presenting today will be Carrie Austin from the San Francisco Bay Board and Amanda Palumbo from the State Water Board. I will begin today with a brief introduction to the mercury problem. Next, we will provide information about specific TMDL projects in the Central Valley and San Francisco Bay regions. Then we will broaden the topic to the statewide mercury program and talk about both the control program for reservoirs and the fish tissue objectives. I'm going to use this slide to talk through both sources and processes. And each of our mercury TMDLs has had a similar focus to make fish safer for people and wildlife to eat. Some of our TMDLs have varied in implementation. So a goal for today is to help you to understand how staff at the state and the regional boards is taking what we've learned in the previous TMDLs along with new science and taking that forward into the statewide control program. Mercury contamination is a widespread problem in California. The state has issued consumption advisories for many water bodies which warn people how to limit how much locally caught fish they should eat. And our mercury comes from multiple sources. Wind and rain transport mercury from California and global industrial emission sources. Also, mercury was mined in the Coast Range and transported to the gold mines and dredge fields in the Sierra Nevada mountains and in the Trinities to amalgamate the gold ore. Mercury can also be naturally occurring in soils and springs, particularly in the Coast Range. Nearly all of these sources of mercury are in the inorganic form. But when the mercury reaches a wetted environment, it's shown at the bottom of the slide here in the sediment, such as in a wetland or reservoir, the mercury can be converted by naturally occurring bacteria to a more toxic organic form. This is called methylmercury. Methylmercury is the most toxic form that you'll find in the environment. Most formation of methylmercury occurs in the sediment of our rivers and streams and reservoirs. Some of it is lost through natural processes of degradation by sunlight and other activity of other bacteria, but then some of this methylmercury moves up into the food chain and is accumulated in the fish. The rate of methylmercury formation varies by habitat and can be affected by water chemistry, including factors such as oxygenation and carbon availability. Our early TMDLs really focused on controlling sources of the inorganic mercury. But controlling the inorganic mercury takes years, often decades, to actually affect the fish mercury levels. So hopefully as this presentation goes on, you'll see that we're trying to add to our toolbox of ways to control the accumulation in fish. Okay. Now I'll describe this accumulation process. Mercury is a bioaccumulative pollutant. That is, it concentrates as you move up the food chain, which you can see in the slide at the bottom. The single largest increase in concentration is the difference between methylmercury in the water and then methylmercury in the algae. Methylmercury concentrations in the algae can be 100,000 times greater than in the water itself. Mercury concentrations continue to increase up the food chain from algae to zooplankton to prey fish, and they continue to increase in predator fish, such as the trout and bass. We're most concerned about toxic levels of methylmercury in fish that birds, such as the osprey pictured on the upper right, and people eat. Our problem of mercury contamination in California is widespread. This map shows our current listed mercury impairments in California. Green denotes water bodies that have already been addressed by TMDLs. And the red shows water bodies that are awaiting TMDLs. The red triangles are our reservoirs that we know are impaired. Potentially the problem is much larger. As we gather more fish mercury data, we find more water bodies that are impaired by mercury.
Janice, before you move off the slide, being addressed mean that there's, or has been addressed, mean that there's a TMDL. Does it mean that the water body is actually in attainment and meeting the water quality objectives?
It means that the TMDL has been approved by US EPA. There's an implementation plan in place, but I don't believe we've reached fish mercury objectives yet.
Thank you.
So, pardon me?
I'm going to ask you to say which century in which we might actually attain them
well.
by the time you're through.
As I said, the earlier TMDLs focused on source control, and we do see improvements when it's right near the water bodies, in the water body if it's right near a mine site. Moving downstream, it's much harder to control, hence the, you'll hear about in the statewide project.
Actually, one other question. For the ones for which TMDLs have been approved and implementation has been put in place, have we any data to show the outcomes of those implementation, hopefully some of the improvements that we've seen versus some of the costs that have gone into complying with the TMDLs and the various requirements related to mercury?
We definitely have data on effectiveness of mine cleanups. I mean, Carrie will also be speaking to that. Translation down to the fish, also again, not yet. So we're waiting though. We're working on it. Okay. So next, I will briefly describe the mercury TMDL efforts in the Central and their outcomes in the Central Valley region. The Central Valley Water Board adopted its first mercury TMDL in 2003 for Clear Lake in Lake County. Clear Lake is a popular fishery and its mercury impairment was well known. After Clear Lake, we completed TMDLs for impaired streams in the Cache Creek watershed. Cache Creek is just downstream of Clear Lake, and it's a significant source of mercury to the Sacramento River Basin and the Delta. The Cache Creek watershed TMDL was adopted in 2005. After Cache Creek, we moved downstream to the Delta, and that TMDL was adopted in 2010. Currently, there are about 80 water bodies in the Central Valley in need of mercury TMDLs. And as many of these are reservoirs, the statewide mercury program is very important for us to be able to complete our TMDLs efficiently. As I mentioned, the Central Valley Water Board started its mercury TMDL effort in the Coast Range with Clear Lake. As part of the Clear Lake TMDL, the Central Valley Water Board adopted the first water quality objective for mercury in fish tissue in California. And the implementation plan for the Clear Lake and the Cache Creek TMDLs focused on source control and particularly inorganic mercury. The TMDL identified 15 mine sites in need of remediation to eliminate their discharges to water. Mine remediation can be dramatic. There are a couple before and after pictures here. The before is on the left. The top one shows the remediation at Sulphur Bank Mine. That's on the shore of Clear Lake. I have to be fair, EPA has been working at this site both before and after the TMDL. The bottom picture shows the remediation at Abbott and Turkey Run Mine. That's was a large mine in the Harley Gulch watershed, which drains to Cache Creek. There's a tributary to Cache Creek right underneath that tailings pile on the left. So the remediation, we know, contained 18,000 kilograms of mercury that would have otherwise discharged directly into the creek. Implementation plans for these TMDLs also focused on erosion control because there are naturally enriched soils in this watershed. And additional mine remediations are in progress in the Cache Creek watershed. The Cache Creek illustrates a problem, though, with trying to control inorganic mercury from the mines. Site cleanups are very effective near their source, but in some water bodies, we have mercury that's been depositing into our waterways since the mines opened over 100 years ago. Mercury in the creek sediments slowly moves downstream, but it's difficult to contain feasibly. And the Delta is the most recent Central Valley Water Board's mercury TMDL. This one required a different approach because little inorganic mercury is discharged directly within the Delta. But conditions in the wetlands and in the open channels in the Delta are conducive for methylmercury formation. So the implementation program for the Delta TMDL addresses both methylmercury and mercury sources. And our discharges were given some specific requirements for inorganic mercury in the project area. Our first phase of implementation also includes methylmercury control studies. Our Delta TMDL required that discharges control methylmercury, but additional information about methylmercury control methods is required to determine how discharges can do this most effectively. The studies will add to our knowledge of potential tools to affect methylmercury production and degradation and where these tools can be most feasibly applied. Groups participating in the methylmercury control studies include public and private entities that manage seasonal wetlands, irrigated agriculture, stormwater agencies, and wastewater treatment plants. Also participating are the Department of Fish and Wildlife and Department of Water Resources. They are evaluating tidal wetlands, and the state and federal agencies state and federal water management agencies are studying effects of management on changes in methylmercury in open water. So I'm eagerly awaiting the results of those studies. Now I'm going to switch topics a little bit to talk about an effort that's shared by both the San Francisco Bay and the Central Valley Water Boards. We know that reducing methylmercury in fish is going to take decades or more. So while the methylmercury sources and mercury sources are being controlled, activities should be undertaken to protect people who eat locally caught fish. In a resolution in 2005, the State Water Board directed the San Francisco Bay and Central Valley Water Boards to, consistent with their regulatory authority, address the public health impacts of mercury in fish in San Francisco Bay and the Delta. In response, the regional boards incorporated requirements for exposure reduction into the San Francisco Bay and Delta TMDLs. And the goal of these programs is to protect fish consumers from harmful effects of contaminants in the locally caught fish. Concern over mercury initiated these programs, but the information also addresses PCBs in fish where they're found. Part of the message that the exposure reduction programs are trying to convey is that some species of fish should be avoided, but that there are some fish that are safe to eat, and we don't want to discourage all fishing. The graphic on the bottom here shows a message from one of the fish consumption advisories with a meter of high, medium, and low mercury fish. So what does the exposure reduction entail? I'm going to use the San Francisco Bay program as an example of the variety of different things that can be accomplished. Key to doing an exposure reduction program, though, is support from the Department of Public Health and the Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment. The educational materials, all of the information that's provided is based on the advisories and the health information that comes from the Department of Public Health. And our advisors are also dependent on the swamp monitoring that comes from this board, because the fish mercury data is largely what is used to produce our fish consumption advisories. The San Francisco Bay Exposure Reduction Program has completed its 2.5-year project. They produced educational materials in multiple languages. They also produced pier signs, and a picture of that is in the top of the slide, showing both the safe and unsafe fish. The program funded 4 community-based organizations to actually then design their own programs of outreach and education within their communities. We know that community members know best how to reach their constituents. The Department of Public Health provided training and technical assistance, and each of the components of the exposure reduction program was evaluated for its level of outreach. Okay. So these programs that are directed through the TMDL are, the TMDLs direct that that the funding would come from entities responsible for reducing the methylmercury and mercury loads. In the San Francisco Bay program, this was primarily the point source dischargers. In the Delta TMDL, it included everybody, including the state and federal agencies and the private landowners. And as I said, the San Francisco Bay program completed its first cycle of activities. Industrial and wastewater dischargers there are now currently planning their next steps. The Delta program, because our TMDL was adopted later, Delta program is just starting. Our work plan will be completed in fall of this year, and then we will start our implementation activities for exposure reduction. There are definitely challenges with doing exposure reduction program. Expectedly, one of these is funding. Resources are scarce. In the Delta, we hear people say that they're already expected to pay for the mercury source control in the studies, and we're also asking them to pay for exposure reduction. Also lacking in resources is the Department of Public Health. They're recognized experts in this work, but currently the Department of Public Health doesn't have the staff time to be able to lead the program in the Delta. So I'm going to turn the presentation now to Carrie Austin.
Thank you, Janice. That was a really nice setup. Good morning, Chair and board members. We're going to move downstream now. So we're moving to, well, San Francisco Bay region, and as you know, it's a lot smaller. So we have fewer listed water bodies compared to the Central Valley region. Janice had mentioned that in the future, there's 80 additional water bodies on their 303D list, whereas we have 14. And in terms of the similarities and the scope of the challenges, most of the 14 additional water bodies on our 303D list are reservoirs, but you know, we have significant challenges. We do have a place on the Pacific Ocean that's listed, so the future will be interesting and hard work. So I'm going to cover now our existing TMDLs. So we have completed in the San Francisco Bay region 2 pair of bay and tributary TMDLs. so San Francisco Bay and its tributary Guadalupe River, and Tamales Bay and its tributary Walker Creek. Both of these tributaries drain mercury mines to these bays, so I'm going to begin with the less complicated TMDLs. So here we are in northwestern Marin County, and you might recognize that as Point Reyes there, iconic shape on the coast. And that blue slit of water is the beautiful Tamales Bay. Let's see, I think the pointer works here. So inland is the cross-pick axis. That's the location of the Gambanini mercury mine. And it drains to Walker Creek. So we did a TMDL for Walker Creek watershed. And then it drains to Tamales Bay. So the Gambanini mercury mine is the single largest source, and by far the largest source of mercury to these two waters. So we don't often get to do this with mercury, but I actually have a good news story in terms of the mine having been cleaned up, and we can see improvement downstream in the sediment. So this is a recent mine. It was opened in the late 1960s, and one of the factors for it being a good news story is that's a relatively short creek in California. That's less than 15 miles long. So here are photos of the mine site from before and after. So before, we're on a hill slope looking pretty directly at it, and you can see these huge gullies. I mean, you can actually see the gullies in it. And on the right, we're on that hill slope, but we're not quite in the same location, and hence the outline is a little different shape. But you can see that now there are no longer any gullies down that, and you can see the vegetation coming back. So in 2000, at this mine, the mining waste was stabilized via erosion control best management practices. And the good news, as I mentioned, continues downstream. There are measurable reductions in mercury concentrations in the sediment